There is a solution for that is sponsored by VARC Solutions. VARC Solutions helps small businesses succeed by delivering expert QuickBooks bookkeeping, consulting, quick-base development, and integrated solutions. If you own a small to medium-sized business that uses QuickBooks or QuickBase, the experts at VARC Solutions can help. In business since 1999, with people who care and the knowledge and experience to solve your toughest problems. Visit varcsolutions.com for all your QuickBooks needs. Welcome back to another edition of There's a Solution for That, where we help small businesses succeed by discussing challenging business problems and best-in-class solutions. All right, welcome everybody to this week's episode of There's a Solution for That. As we always do, we've got lots of different topics that we talk about on this show, and today is no different. We've got a fantastic guest, Rod Voles, who's the CEO of FutureBridge, to come in and talk about some of the elements of how to manage highly technical projects that are long, involved, and more, lots of details, because he's got a lot of experience in that. So, Rod, thanks for joining the call.
Hey, Brad, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation with you and your audience. FutureBridge, just like VARC, I think we both serve common market, the small to mid-market companies. So, we work with business owners, CEOs every day. And this topic comes up all the time, the whole notion of project management. So happy to be here discussing this. I'm looking forward to our chat.
Perfect. Thank you so much, by the way. And, and the reason why, when I first, ran into you and said, oh my gosh, this is a fantastic topic, is because first off, I know we have lots of clients that are themselves dealing with projects, some super easy, some super complicated, some that last a couple months, some that last a couple years, right? So we have a very wide, variety of clients dealing with those kind of issues. But even in our own company, right, when we're doing technical projects, sometimes we get it right and sometimes we don't. And we'd like to get those things better. We'd like to do those things better. So I, just like our clients and some of the folks that we work with, can learn a lot from your knowledge and your experience and your expertise. So let's go ahead and kick it off. Like, okay, so when it comes to project, I think one of the biggest things that you are probably an advocate for is creating a project plan. So tell us about like the plan and what needs to be in those things.
Absolutely. And I think there's even one little nugget to toss out before we get into the nuance of the plan. And that's like, why do we do project management in the first place, right? It's to accomplish a goal, right? Projects typically have a beginning and an end. And it's always real important when you're developing a project plan to think about where is it that you want to be? What's the ultimate objective? And then wind it backwards. And so you're thinking about your plan. I think it's really important to chunk the work into things that could be measured, things that are easy to understand. Resourcing is another thing, like who's going to do the work, right? I think when you're talking about business owners and project management, we're not talking like a 5-year software development project. Typically, they'll have a dedicated project manager for that. So I think what we're really talking about here is project management light. What are the basic principles, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think another consideration when you're doing project planning is to think about what are the things that you do really well that you want to leverage and exploit in executing the plan. That might be certain tools you have at your disposal, certain resources. What are the inputs? What are the things that you need to have on hand to be successful in executing the project, right? That might be as simple as having, some collaboration tools. It might be information from your customer. It might be some design specs, whatever it is, right? So that's like the project planning phase. You're thinking about what's the scope, what's the range of possibilities. You want to think about things like risk as well and make sure you're accounting for risk as you're modeling out your plan, right? I like to think in terms of stepwise things and usually, start simple, sketch out like the top 5 or 6, types of activities, and then you can, go into more detail successfully as you iterate your plan. But I think, There's keep it simple is really important. Don't over engineer it, and make sure that your first draft has a good, clear output, outcome, and good measurable milestones along the way are probably the most rudimentary things, when you're starting out with the plan.
Okay, those are all great suggestions, and I like the measurable part, and I like the having a clear outcome, and so good suggestions. And I'm curious on the flip side of that, which is what if you're dealing with a project where it's really hard to come up with clearly defined outcomes because maybe the client isn't even 100% clear on what they want. They just know they've got a problem, and you're in a position to solve it, but there isn't maybe so much of a clear this is exactly what I want it to look like or how I want it to work yet.
Yeah, you ever hear the expression, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there? I think that is a good indication that more conversations need to be had about the project objectives.
Hmm.
In very basic terms, what do you want to accomplish from a business perspective? Maybe it's creating a new product capability. Maybe it's extending a service offering. Maybe on the sales and marketing side, it's tapping a new market, launching and executing a new campaign. Whatever it is, you really have to be clear on where you are going. That is just fundamental, 101. Until you get to that, the project management is really, you're not ready to begin the project, would be my advice.
Okay, so this is again so for you. You're probably like, duh,
Yeah.
and I'm sitting there going, gosh, I just learned something right there. So, in other words, instead of starting the project, maybe it's time to put the pause on it and say, well, part of the step one of the project plan is to make sure that we have a clear project. Go figure, right? So, so how do you do that in an environment when the client is maybe not sure how much this thing is going to cost and like how much time and energy do they want to invest in this, but you as a consultant,
Right,
whether you're a
right.
software solution provider or whatever, how do you like do you start billing for that up front? Do you build it into the long term? Like, I mean, there's so many things.
That's a great question. I think a common approach when there's fuzz down here is to propose a first phase of doing an exploratory discovery assessment type engagement. And, in that scenario, share the risk reward with the customer, right? You don't want to get tagged with, providing 10 or 20 hours of free advice, helping them figure it out, right? So,
Right.
fair and reasonable thing to do would be to propose a lightweight effort at a reduced rate or a capped set of hours if you want to allay any concerns they might have about costs or feel like you're, charging them for something that should be part of the sales process, right? But
Right.
that doing that allows you to formalize in a more structured manner things like scope, boundaries, constraints, all those things that were kind of floating out there as fuzz, you can bring into focus with the objective of when you get to the end of that, you're delivering either a range of options or a roadmap, a phase two project, high level plan, if you will. You
Hmm.
can almost use that to get paid to do the upfront project planning, if you will. So
Right.
that's a common way to handle that.
Well, so I like that in so many ways. So it's like because yeah, as a service provider or a solution provider, you're right. You don't want to just eat those hours when the client could just go, "Thank you for the plan. I'm going to go now, walk away, and hire somebody else to go do what you said we should do." That's terrible, right? you
Yeah,
know.
right, right.
Um, but at the same time, you don't want to like charge somebody a whole bunch of money and then go, "But it doesn't look like we can solve your problem." So sorry.
Sorry. Right. Yeah, and there's sometimes an expectation that like, why should you need to that? You're the experts. Well, yeah, we are, but there's still a baseline amount of information. It also um, provides an opportunity to go maybe pull in a subject matter expert if it's needed, or to do a little research, right? We're,
Yeah.
we're doing an engagement with a customer right now, and we've taken this exact same approach. We scoped out a 20-hour, discovery effort precisely to go find all the little additional pieces of information so we can more accurately, kind of forecast level of effort and put out a detailed plan that will ensure that we get to the outcome that they ultimately wanted. But we couldn't have done that initially without, going down this path of having some initial exploratory work.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I love that. I love that on so many levels. I love all that. Um, so I think one of the challenges that I've experienced, and I think a lot of people have experienced at you know doing projects at any level, right, is the whole thing about scope creep, right? You define a scope, it's super clear, you got your milestones, you got everything nailed down, but then it changes. So how do you deal with the scope creeps kind of story?
That's like my least favorite question because it gets to the heart of the very challenge of project management, which is what happens when something doesn't go as planned or as expected, right?
Mhm.
It involves sometimes delivering bad news, right? And it really gets back to other things, which I know you share this in your approach, this emotional intelligence, right? I think it's really important to have good, I mean, duh, this is Captain Ivy's here, but the strength of customer relationship is so important in managing the scope, right? Having their trust through prior experiences helps carry those buckets when things get tough and you have to have those tough conversations, right? But it's something that bad news does not get better with time, right? So the
Right.
second you think something is going off track, huddle internally, assess what's happening, and if you think that there's real risk that something's going off track, scope is creeping, or whatever, um, having those conversations early and often with the customer, even if you're worried about the outcome, it's better to have that bad outcome early in terms of their reaction or whatever than whatever that's going to be now. It's going to be 100 times worse if you wait unnecessarily and then things are beyond repair, right? So
Yep.
um, it's really change management, communication, all of those basic principles about how you interact with humans on a professional level, right?
Yep. Well, and I wish I could say that every single project that we've ever done has gone perfectly well, and we haven't dealt with those issues, but we have. It's like, we learn just like every business out there. It's like sometimes we get it wrong, and we really try hard to not get it wrong twice in a row. Um, but those are things that we learn from, and I try to learn from folks like you that have been there before and been there and done that. But one of the things, like interestingly enough, I think one of the things that we've learned to try to do is to tell clients when they are maybe pushing an agenda that's going to go off the rails, when they're pushing for something that we know is going to be a train wreck, right? And so instead of appeasing the client saying yes we can do that, yes we can do that, when we know it's going to be ending poorly, being able to say up front, based on our experience, this is not going to go well. You're not going to be happy. How about we don't do that?
Right. Right. And, I mean, that's the hardest thing in our profession to do. Well, in business, we want to be pleasers. We want to make our clients happy and really want to be working with us, right? But, I think having the conviction to be able to not only say those difficult things, but also then, are you willing to walk away from business, right? At some point, if you have a client that is absolutely entrenched in a position or viewpoint and they refuse to look at it and take your best advice, and that not doing so is going to be failure, right? Sometimes walking away is the answer. I mean, I can count on one hand the times that that's happened in my career, but
Yeah.
kind of a option of last resort. But at the end, we want to protect our reputations and our own legacies, and
Yeah.
sometimes we have to follow our intuition there.
Yeah, I like what you I like kind of like where you're going with that in terms of like sometimes you not just tell a client no, but just sometimes you need to walk away and say, maybe it's us, maybe we're not the right provider
Right.
for you, maybe there's a better one out there for you. But one of the things I think is interesting is when we are like absolute experts in an area, a client is engaging with us because of our expertise. We tell them what they should do, and they're like, I don't agree. Like,
What do you do? Right.
oh, how can I, you asked us for our expertise. We've just given
Right.
it to you, and you're like, well, I don't think so. I want to do it a different way. Okay, great. Maybe that's the time to say, in
Right.
good luck.
Right. And sometimes people also just want to be heard, right? So maybe in all of that stuff you just heard, maybe there's a couple nuggets that you can bring back and work into the plan and say, hey, listen, we heard you, right? And look, here's how we're making the adjustment. And maybe that'll be enough to, satisfy what they felt was a compelling need to assert, their own viewpoint on how you're doing it. But right, I
Right.
mean, it gets back to there's a reason you hired us, right? It's because we have the expertise, the experience, the solution that you're looking for, right? Um, so sometimes it's
Yeah.
going to fall where they're going to fall.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Uh, here's some other funny anecdotes that I'm curious again what you think about as it relates to like the projects that you've led in your career is when you're trying to document a process like okay, we're going to try to go from here to here, so how are you doing it now, right? And so you start going through that discovery phase and asking all those questions about, well, tell me what you're doing and how you're doing it. And I just I love it comically when I say I say love it in jest, but you've got a team of folks on the on the other end of the call, and you start saying, how do you do it, and then they start disagreeing about how
Right,
it's actually currently being done.
right.
um, what do you do in that scenario when they don't even know how it's working now?
Remember that conversation we had earlier about scope creep? Yeah, this
Yeah.
sometimes one of those contributors to just that. But again, I think um, facilitation skills, bringing structure and process into the mix. I happen to be a trained business process engineer, so there's a definite methodology you can employ to help minimize, some of that. But at the end of the day, like if you're talking about automating something or you want to, um, leverage tools to make a process be better, you can't automate what you haven't already standardized and defined, right? So sometimes you're just going to run into those areas of chaos where there is they still have to figure it out, right? And that might
Mhm.
very well be that first change order you come across on that project. But again, I think it gets back to the communication part. If that's something you didn't anticipate, it wasn't accounted for in the project schedule, it kind of brings up one other aspect that I advocate for in project planning, which is to build in a little bit of slack to account for risk, right? And I think effective project management, you're not pushing all the risk to the client. You're building in some tolerance for, ooh, that didn't go how it's supposed to, right? You don't want to be
Mhm.
diming and doing a change request every time, something looks and feels different than you expected it to be, right? So there's a
Yeah.
healthy give and take there, right?
Yeah, so the risk is not just this project is going to go off the rails, but more of like there's it might take longer than we anticipated, which could put you in a bad place. It could put the client in a bad place. It could be a cost consideration, right? There's a whole bunch of risks. So I just mentioned a few. Are there any others that are like when you
Yeah,
think of
well,
risk?
I think another thing when you're thinking about the project at large at a macro level, right? There's the quality triangle. There's time, budget, and quality. And you can't have all three.
Hmm.
Usually something has to give in that. If you're super, super budget conscious, well then, that quality element, and I don't mean like poor quality, but just if you wanted, 99 features, well, maybe you can only get 65, right? Something has to give in that equation. Um, so I think, you know, you increase the odds of success by intentionally thinking about risk. What are the things that could cause the project to not be successful or things that could take it off track, right?
Yep.
Maybe, certain resources all of a sudden aren't available. Maybe some new disruptive technology or a competitor did something that changes the whole equation to begin with, right? I mean,
Yeah.
there's so many variables, but the better you can at least identify the top 10 or 15 risks that are unique to that customer. There's always standard risks, that good project management accounts for, but taking a look at the specific situation with that customer and what they're asking you to do,
Hmm.
it's really helpful. And then, um, check in on those along the way. Don't forget that you did it, right? Because that helps guide those conversations when things get in a difficult patch. You've
Yep.
already socialized the idea of this might happen. and
Hmm.
not bringing it up out of the blue and being that bad news person. Like, hey, remember that thing we talked about over here? It's actually coming into light a little bit, right?
Yep.
Yeah, it just makes it easier to have that chat.
That's awesome. Well, one of the things that I've tried to like raise the bar on our own internal teams when we're managing projects, especially, I mean, if it's a small one, I mean, we can do those all day long, right? If there's, but if it's a longer engagement, if there's more moving parts, there is more risk potentially in that thing. One of the things that I've tried to get my team to do more effectively is asking the question, if this project didn't go perfectly and or it took longer or it ended up costing more, who on your team is going to get the most upset? Okay. And oftentimes, especially, when you're working with maybe smaller companies, the owner is the one that's going to be upset. Okay. And what I've suggested is like, okay, and that person's not on this call. Okay. Maybe that person should be on this call and part of those conversations. And if they're not willing to be on these calls and part of these conversations, we're maybe not starting where we need to start because, and I think that just goes to the whole root concept of stakeholders, right? And getting
Right.
stakeholder buy-in. But with smaller companies, a lot of times it is the owner that's not always involved, but they oftentimes are the ones that care the most. So what have you seen in some of the things that you've led?
Oh gosh, you know, 100 different things, right? I think one thing that comes to my mind is sometimes you have very mercurial owners who have an idea in their head of a project they want, and then they delegate, and they let you go run off and work with that delegate to do the
Hmm.
work,
Yep.
right? But the owner really, you get really far in the track, and they take a look, go, this isn't at all what I thought it was going to
Right.
be, right? So I mean that to me is a very, very common stakeholder misalignment issue that we run into. And the only way to overcome that is really intensify efforts to engage the true sponsor of that project, which happens to be the owner in that case, right?
Right.
They can say all the nice things in the world, like, oh, I've given Barbara all the, you know, full authority to do this. Well, you come to find later, well, yeah, not really, right? So again, it's knowing your customer, knowing the
Yep.
real dynamic that's going on behind the scenes, and sometimes you don't always have the ability to see that, but
Yeah.
it's a common gotcha when you're working in the small mid market.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, let's shift gears just a little bit and I want to talk about like project managers versus subject matter expertise or subject matter experts because I mean, I think sometimes they're the same person, but sometimes they're different and when do you pull one in versus another one? Should you always have both? I mean, what are your experiences when it comes to PMs and subject matter experts?
I think the answer there simply depends, right? It depends on what's the scope, what's the budget, what's the reality of who you have available. I've seen technical leads who can manage very effectively. Maybe they don't prefer it or like it, but they're still very effective. There are some people who, gosh, you should never ever empower them with any management responsibility. They're purely that technical, smart brain who's, at the whiteboard making magic happen, but they couldn't manage their way out of a box, right? So again, it depends on the actual resources you have available, on
Hmm.
what budget you have. And, I'm a big believer, you marry up the reality of what, who you have with what you're trying to do. And sometimes you make some concessions and adjustments accordingly. But maybe you have to look outside and bring in a part-time project manager, right? But I also think, knowing your own workforce, there's and who's the up and coming person that maybe wants to take on more management responsibility. Sometimes these can be good projects for them to cut their teeth on with some
Yeah.
adult supervision along the way, right? There's so many answers to that question, but I probably didn't give you a good clean answer there.
Well, it sounds to me, and again, I'm just kind of mirroring back to you what I think I'm hearing there is you definitely need somebody that's managing the project. Um, if it's a subject matter expert that does have the ability to manage at the same time, it could be that one person. But regardless, especially if that's not the case, you need somebody that is very organized, very detailed, and then speaking to the point you made earlier about just the ability to communicate and have that EQ to work with a client, right?
Right.
I can't just be up there, like you said, writing on a whiteboard, coming up with this master plan, and I'm not even listening to the client. I'm not even telling them what I'm thinking about. It's
Right.
just the
Right.
magic's happening. So it sounds like, regardless, you need somebody that's playing that role. I don't know, not on this podcast, but maybe it was another conversation that we had. But were you saying at some point the whole single throat to choke or something like that? I forget. Have you heard that phrase before?
Yeah. Yeah. You know, the you want things to be simple for your customer, right? So the idea of project management, say, have a single throat to choke. So it's their single point of contact. You're not putting them through the gyrations of, oh, this is a technical thing, I have to call John. Oh, wait, this is a schedule thing, I have to call, Sue over there, right? It's, you know, the whole point of having project management is to streamline, um, the communication and the execution of the project, in a way that's easy for the customer to engage with you as a service provider, right?
Yep.
Um, but that said, you can have you hit a couple really key points, to have that emotional quotient, that EQ, to be organized, to be thorough, to communicate well. Those are all attributes of an effective project manager. Then experience factors in, like, really the ability to look beyond the schedule and the words that are on paper, and what they're seeing in meetings, right? And to understand true issues as they're surfacing before they become, you know, materialize into a much bigger issue, right? That's where, um, you as a owner providing services need to really make sure there's I keep saying adult in the room, but somebody with more experience who, if you've empowered a more junior project manager, make sure that they're backed up and supported with someone more senior that can do those kind of quality checks, occasionally sit in on some customer meetings and provide another level of
Yeah.
surveillance, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
I
really
love it.
important.
Very good. Very good advice. I've had some people like take that last scenario that you just mentioned, where maybe you're backing them up, or maybe you're sitting in on a meeting. I've had people tell me about scenarios where they felt, in those scenarios, they felt maybe more micromanaged because somebody was looking over their shoulder, versus feeling like they were being supported. They felt like they were being monitored.
Right, right. All right. Now, I mean, now we're getting to the world of mentoring versus coaching versus managing, right?
Yeah, yeah,
There's nuance there. They're all a little bit different, but um, I trust that you and others would know their workforce better to know which applies the best. But just some mechanism where someone with more experience and wisdom has the ability to engage in a productive way that reduces risk for everyone, ensures a higher probability of the outcomes you're trying to achieve, right? That's the end game. But yeah, that's it's a slippery slope in how you do that, and you want to
yeah,
do it in a way that fits in with your culture and your management processes and all
yeah.
that.
Exactly. Yeah. No, we're not talking about project management anymore. Now we're talking about human psychology
Right. I
and
mean,
behavioral dynamics.
100%.
Oh my goodness, my goodness. Well,
Yeah,
so as we get to the end of our episode today, tell me a little bit more about what you do specifically, at Future Bridge. Like, what are some of the kind of projects that you guys do? Just so that if somebody's listening and they're like, "Oh, I want that," I now know somebody I can go reach out to.
sure. Brad, thank you for asking. So, Future Bridge is we're kind of like a Bain and McKinsey type uh, management consultancy for the small and mid market business. We're focusing on government contracting, the managed service provider industry, technology providers. Those are three of the big target industry segments we're supporting, and we do that through offering three basic types of services. First is fractional CXO support, interim executive management, if you will. The second is strategic growth services. So that's helping those businesses with their go to market, with scaling for growth. Maybe there's some sales and marketing support they need. And then the third is technology driven transformation, and principally around AI, cyber, and CRM. We're not trying to be all things to all people, but those are really the three areas we think can have the most impact for affecting the change we're trying to help our customers navigate through.
Okay, and those are huge. I mean, cyber huge, CRM huge, right? So you've got a niche there, but it's also pretty huge too. Um, so just to help me maybe get a little more clarity on that, can you give me an example of like a recent project, just so I kind of have a sense for either the size or the scope or
Sure.
that kind of detail?
So there's one of our customers, they produce, like when you get a TSA clear and they have those kiosks.
Hmm.
This is a competitor that is producing hardware that does the full identity verification and proofing. It takes it one step further, so they're a little bit unique in the marketplace, but they need help with their go-to-market. They need help with integrating some additional AI capabilities into their actual product to simplify the operations and make things more efficient. So it's a good example of they kind of need that chief growth officer support. They need some
Yeah.
technology integration support, and it plays right to our strengths.
Okay, yeah, because I can imagine if you've got if you have a typical business scenario where there's like some person in that business that came up with this magical solution, right? They're technical experts. They may not have the business acumen, right, to go, yeah, let's come up with a business model that makes that work, right? And
Right.
you look at great companies in our history, and oftentimes there's been both people, right? You've got your Bill Gates, and then you've got the other guy, right? you know,
Apple. Yep.
so sounds like you're helping clients kind of fill that gap sometimes when they've got maybe strong in one area, weak or another, where you can
Yeah.
kind of come in at a
It,
strategic.
I think some common threads, we're also working closely in the private equity community. So what we're going to them and saying, hey, you've made this investment in these 10 portfolio companies. Which ones are not performing like you'd like to see them? Let us come
Mhm.
in and help analyze where they are, and we'll come back to you with recommendations on how you can, uh, make them more profitable and help them become rising stars instead of being the dogs in your portfolio, right? And
Yeah,
that's by bringing our whole array of skill set in terms of, doing the diagnostics on the business and helping them come up with that action plan on how to, scale and get to market maybe a little bit better.
perfect, perfect. Yeah, and so that's where that sort of like that big master consultancy, and being able to help, not just small companies, but mid-sized companies that are trying to get even larger, do it effectively.
Right. I mean, everybody that's in the Future Bridge Collective is what we're loosely calling it. It's folks that have, 30, 40 plus years experience and expertise. They've worked at the large consultancies. They've worked in the Fortune 500s. We've been there. We've done that. We've learned the hard way. And when people hire us, right, it's so they can avoid making all the mistakes that we've already made, right? And try and help them get to success a little bit quicker and cleaner.
Yeah, that's awesome. Awesome. Well, I love meeting people like you because I know very clearly that, I don't know everything about everything, but I know a lot of people that do. Right? So being able to find people like you and be able to say, hey, client, or hey, prospect, I've got a guy that can help you with that kind of stuff is what I love doing. That's like one of the things that I love doing, is connecting people. So thank you so much, Rod, for being on the show and sharing your expertise. Really appreciate it.
Well, Brad, is one connector to another. I think we're very common in that regard. So really enjoyed this. Thank you for the opportunity, and I'm looking forward to continuing to engage as we work with our customers out there.
That's awesome. Awesome. Well, for those of you that are listening and watching online, again, thanks for tuning in. Hope you got some value out of this, especially for those of you that are managing technical projects, some that are more complicated, more prone to risk. And so hopefully some of the tips and techniques that Rod has shared will help you do those better. And that's what we're all about, is continuing to get better. So thanks for watching, and tune in next week for the next episode. There is a Solution for That is produced by VARC Solutions. This episode was produced by Ashley White and Aaron Riley. You can subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Watch the video version on youtube.com/There's a Solution for That. or visit varcsolutions.com/podcast, where you'll find our entire podcast archive, as well as show notes, links to solution providers, and complete transcripts of every episode. If you love the podcast, please leave a review with your comments.